If I asked you, what was Nintendo's first handheld system, most of you would probably say the Game Boy. But the creator of the Game Boy, Gunpei Yokoi, actually made a series of handhelds under the Game & Watch name that were released about 9 years before the Game Boy hit the market. Each Game & Watch system had a single game on it that was played on a primitive LCD screen, similar to early Tiger LCD games you may remember from around the same time. Anyway, as LCD games faded out of popularity and the Game Boy became a huge hit, Nintendo decided it might be a good idea to bring back some of those classic Game & Watch games on their new handheld, and thus, the Game & Watch Gallery series of games were born. Each Game & Watch Gallery has somewhere between 4 and 6 games on it. There were 4 collections released in total, but they came out over a long stretch, so the series starts on the Game Boy, but ends on the Game Boy Advance. The collection I'm going to look at here is the first of the 4, which was released on the original Game Boy with some Super Game Boy support to add a little color. Although this is the first game in the Game & Watch series, it's actually kind of a follow-up to another game called the Game Boy Gallery, which was only released in Europe and Australia. One strange thing about these games is that they're actually made by Tosei, a Japanese development house that makes tons of games, but is seldom credited for their work. In fact, the vice president of Tosei called the company a, quote, secretive ninja developer. Other games that Tosei secretly developed include Super Princess Peach and the Dragon Quest Rocket Slime game on DS, as well as Metal Gear Solid on the Game Boy Color. And those are just a few examples of the over 1,000 games that Tosei has worked on since it started back in the NES days. But enough backstory, let's move on to the game itself. Game & Watch Gallery is comprised of 4 smaller mini-games. Each game is basically like a simplified arcade game where you try to see if you can beat the high score. The games included are Manhole, Fire, Octopus, and last but not least, Oil Panic. Each game has a modern and a classic mode, as well as an easy and hard difficulty setting. The classic mode is pretty much an exact copy of the Game & Watch LCD game that each game is based on. They are each decent fun, but they're not the main draw for me. The modern games, on the other hand, are graphical and gameplay upgrades to the originals, making them much more interesting. But even though they have been updated, they're still very basic, but that's sort of what makes them fun. So let's look at them now, one by one. The first game is Manhole. The object of the game is to keep the platforms, which I guess are supposed to be manhole covers, in place as the people walk across them. Getting the people to cross from one side to the other scores you a point. If the manhole is uncovered as the person walks by, then they fall in and you lose a life. You have a total of 3 lives to score as many points as you can. It's pretty simple, but it's also strangely addictive. My best score is 260 points on this one, which is pretty good, I think. Next up is Fire. The game works like this. People jump out of a burning building, and you use a trampoline to bounce them to safety. Each person, or monkey, or toadstool, or whatever, that makes it to the carriage scores you a point. It takes 3 bounces to get each one there. The thing that makes this game hard is that each type of character has a different bounce height. So before long, this game becomes a lot like juggling an orange, a ping pong ball, and a bowling ball all at once. It gets really hectic, and honestly, I'm not very good at this one. On a side note, I'm not good at juggling in real life either, so maybe this one just isn't for me. I still think it's fun to see how well I can do, but so far my best score is 186. This game is actually very popular and has been cloned many times over the years. The first one that came to mind for me was Earthworm Jim 2, where you had to bounce the puppies on the marshmallows, but I'm sure I've played it other places too. This is definitely not my favorite of the group, but that's probably because I stink at it. The third game is Octopus. This game seems really simple, but I think it might actually be the hardest on the collection. All you do is climb down the rope, run over, grab some treasure, and then bring it back to the boat. The only controls are left and right, so it's really easy, but dodging the tentacles can be really tough. Especially since if you get greedy and try to grab a ton of treasure, you move slower. You can throw the money at the tentacles in a jam, but that basically undoes all your progress, so it's sort of a trade-off. I think graphically this is the most interesting of the bunch, but it's probably my least favorite since it's kinda repetitive and I never really felt the urge to beat my high score. My personal best was 127, but I definitely played this one less than the others. On a totally different note, you may recognize the octopus from Mr. Game & Watch's Smash move in Smash Bros. Brawl. The last game on the collection is Oil Panic, and it's definitely the most complicated. Basically, there are two screens. On the upper screen, you move Mario around and try to catch oil before it hits the floor. On the lower screen, Yoshi moves around side to side while Luigi and Donkey Kong Jr. just chill on the grass. Basically, Mario can only catch 3 drops of oil in each glass before he has to dump them out onto the bottom screen. The problem is that you can't dump it on Luigi or Donkey Kong Jr. If you do, you lose a life. The only way to prevent this is to dump it on the side where Yoshi is, so he'll eat it before it hits them. So you have a lot to keep track of. You have to catch the oil, but not overfill either container, while keeping track of which side Yoshi is on so you don't spill the hot oil on the people below. It's hard, but it's really fun once you get the hang of it. There are 2 ways you can die in the game, though. Miss the oil 3 times, or spill the oil on Donkey Kong Jr. and Luigi 3 times. Each is on its own counter, so for example, missing the oil once and spilling the oil on Luigi twice will not end the game. You have to miss 3 or spill 3 to die. This was definitely my favorite of the bunch. That's not to say the others were bad, but this one was much more fun to try to get a new high score. My personal best was 387. Overall, I'd say the first Game & Watch gallery is a lot more fun than I thought it would be. Sure, it's simple, but sometimes simple is fun. It may not be made by Nintendo, but honestly, you'd never know the difference if I didn't tell you. It's a polished and fun experience, and since it's pretty common, you can pick it up for like $3, which makes this one easy for me to recommend. That's the end of our show. Thanks as always for watching, and please head over to RetrowareTV.com for more videos from me and the rest of the gang. Until next time, this is Ben saying have a great week, month, or however long it takes me until I have another one of these things done.